Hello, and welcome, all my beautiful vibrant hearts and ephemeral souls. Today we are going to be talking about something very, very special. We're going to be talking about Neptune's transit into Aries. So get comfy, get cozy, get excited. We have a lot of good stuff to cover. So yeah. A couple of things that I want to mention. I have notes about this. That's what you're going to see me looking at because I have a lot to say. So this helps me stay focused and on track. But let's talk about it, right? Neptune. So for those who don't know, Neptune has recently gone into Aries. It went into Aries March 30th, 2025. I know I'm a few days late making this. I apologize. It will be in Aries until it retrogrades back into Pisces. That will be October 22nd of 2025. It will then go direct and start to move back out of Pisces into Aries. So it will re-enter Aries January 26th, 2026. And then it will remain in the sign of Aries until May 2038. So Neptune is one of those planets in astrology that has quite a long transit time, and it brings up a lot of things. So what this video is really going to be talking about are kind of broad strokes overviews, where we're going to be kind of discussing, what Neptune does, what it's here for, what it means as it moves through Aries, who Aries is as kind of a character in the zodiac. So we have a lot of good stuff. And this is kind of bringing me to a couple of little caveats before we even get started. So one thing that I want to mention is that keep in mind, these are, like I said, broad strokes overviews. It will be very specific to you based off of what is in your chart. So the house that Aries falls in, if you have any big Aries placements, how those placements are aspected, how they interact with other parts of your chart, all that good stuff. For those who are interested, I do offer astrological guidance sessions. I will link that down below. And that's where we really sit down and we do a deep dive based on your personal astrology, as well as your life circumstances and your goals and what you're trying to create. Because again, it's affected by your personal astrology and just the circumstances of how your life journey has unfolded. And so even if you don't sit down and do that with me, I think it does behoove everybody to take a closer look at, like I said, where Aries falls in your chart, and if you have placements there and how those placements are aspected. Sorry, I have a smudge on my glasses, you guys. It's going to drive me nuts and I won't be able to ignore it. So then we're going to get started because this is just going to drive me absolutely bonkers. That's better. It's not great, but it's better. That's all I can ask for. Okay, so the first thing to kind of talk about here is who is Neptune? Something, I guess, actually, before I even start with who Neptune is. It's important to keep in mind that Neptune is one of those planets where it retrogrades for about half of the year. Now, a retrograde brings around unfinished business. It also, can force energy to go inward, right? Retrogrades are one of those things that it slows down energy and movement in that area of life in order to gain more perspective, more wisdom. And because Neptune is retrograde for about half of the year, that's a pretty big retrograde period. So the way that I like to look at it is almost like kind of like an ebb and flow of a tide, because it spends just about as much time retrograde as it does direct, generally speaking. And it also has a very long transit time. So as Neptune makes its way through a sign, this is really a long period of time of greater understanding. And that's especially true for Neptune. So who is Neptune? In modern astrology, it is the ruler of Pisces and the 12th house. Its overall energy, it's very dreamy, very creative, incredibly spiritual. It is a spiritual and emotional healer. You guys, I can't talk. But it is also very, illusionary, boundaryless, or by contrast, it can sometimes be too dogmatic, too rigid. It is addicted, stagnant, and corrupt in power, or altogether powerless. It is also very, very psychic. So this is kind of the character that Neptune plays. And because it's about, it retrogrades for about half of the year, what tends to happen is that while Neptune is direct, we're dealing with, what we think is happening in that particular area of life, and with that energy it's working with, so whatever sign it's moving through. And when it goes retrograde, this is really a time where big time disillusionment tends to take place, right? This is a time where we get clarity, we get insight, we get understanding. And this is why, you'll see kind of that contrast where it can be very, very spiritual, but it can then be very, like I said, dogmatic. Or like too rigid, right? It's either too boundaryless or too rigid. And a lot of the times the process of, it being direct and then going retrograde allows us to get new insight, new clarity about our own internal world. It also is characterized by a lot of like highs and lows or light and shadows, so we can understand something fully. This is why, anything in that 12th house that in your own personal chart can be things that it takes a very long time to master. Like I said, there's a lot of illusions. Things are hazy, things are unclear, and it serves a very divine purpose. And the way I kind of like to sum it all up is that I like to say that Neptunian energy is kind of like the divine storyteller. So when Neptune moves through a sign, we are understanding, because all the signs of the zodiac really just constitute like characters that we can identify with, or that sparks something within us, right? So just as we would watch characters on the screen and we're like, oh, that really speaks to me, and it sparks greater understanding, or it serves as like a jumping off point for deeper insight and self-wisdom. Neptune is, like I said, that divine storyteller that helps us explore those characters of the zodiac, right? So when Neptune moves through a sign, like I said, it's the ebb and flow, right? Direct and then retrograde. And it's where we're really exploring in depth the light and shadow, highs and lows, good and bad of a sign in its entirety. And what I always like to say as well is that, again, that Neptunian Piscean 12th house energy has a lot to do with the sublimation of power. It's our personal power. It's how we regard power structures in our lives. That's why the 12th house rules things like institutions, so governmental bodies, schools, churches, hospitals, etc. And there's also, there's kind of like this undercurrent of like imparting some type of moral lesson along with it. So it's our relationship to our personal power, to the power structures in our lives and those who inhabit those power structures, and then to our higher power. And so it's how we balance a sense of power within ourselves, within our lives. And that's why a lot of the times whatever is in our 12th house can tend to represent an energy or areas of life that have a certain amount of power over us, or that we are trying to have power over. So while there is a highly spiritual energy, and again, it is very like creative and it's divinely guided, it's about being able to balance that part of ourselves and our spiritual selves with our earthly responsibilities in a healthy manner, right? If you think about the opposite of the 12th house, which is, the 6th house and is naturally ruled by Virgo, there's this kind of undercurrent of being able to be grounded in the material, as well as being able to be a healthy person, right? So balancing what is a healthy attachment is very much a part of this energy. So as Neptune moves through this sign, we have those ebbs and flows. We get to really see the great arcs, the light and shadow, the fall from grace and the redemption. We really explore a character. And that really kind of lends the question then, who is the character of Aries? So just kind of some broad strokes overviews. It is the natural ruler of the first house. Everyone will have it in different places in their chart, but that's where it falls in the natural wheel of the zodiac. So Aries is the ruler of the first house. It is ruled by Mars. It is the divine masculine energy. In some ways, it can be very, very childlike, because when we think about the houses of the zodiac, it tells a developmental story. And the first house is the house of the undifferentiated self. For all of like my human development nerds out there, you'll know what I'm talking about, but that's the stage in your development where everything is you are everything. There's no differentiation. Whereas like the second house in the developmental story that the wheel of the zodiac tells, the second house is where we differentiate ourselves from our main caregiver, and we notice that that's a separate thing. And that's why that house can often speak about themes of security and attachment in its own right. But the first house is the house of the undifferentiated self. So it is us, we are it. There is no separation. There can be a very, very childlike energy. It's like I always say it's your divine id. It is also always, beset by the cusp line is always your ascendant as well. So there's a very like groundedly like personal quality to this. It's part of your personality, not necessarily part of your soul, but your personality. That's the energy we're dealing with. Aries is the trailblazer, being the first house of the zodiac, and or the ruler of the first house, and because it always follows Pisces, where there is this illusion, there's a wrap up, there's like a necessity. There is a necessity to get clarity. I cannot talk today, pardon me. Having Aries then kind of comes next. This is where we get that clarity. We go on this journey to understand something better, and we are reborn with this new understanding, this new sense of self into the next chapter, right? Where we begin the cycle all over again. So Aries carries that quality of, it's very direct, what you see is what you get. It's also the sense of like, all right, I have this understanding. I get it now. I wrapped up the cycle. I got to get moving again. I got to do something with it. So it's very action oriented, ruled by Mars as well. And this is why it's also important to remember that while it can be very childlike in its own way, it is also the warrior. Like, don't mess with Aries. It is also the warrior of the zodiac, right? So Aries gets things started. Aries gets things up and going. It's a cardinal sign. It is important to know that because that's part of its job, one of the drawbacks of Aries that it has to kind of work with and learn to temper is that it can run out of steam, right? It can kind of like run out of it lacks longevity at times. So for Aries, there's a focus on movement, on drive. There's also a focus on the physical body, because the first house can deal with our physical body. Because it's ruled by Mars, depending on what kind of astrological lore and system you're using, there can be a focus on sex. There can be a focus on anger. It is a very self-focused energy, right? Which can be, in its shadow context, very selfish, but in a more light context, can be very much predicated on self-respect. It makes me think of that quote that the foundation of anger is self-respect, and that can be Aries when they're in a healthy energy. It's also very focused on renewal because it is that first house, right? Something to keep in mind is that the opposite of Aries is always Libra. Opposite of the first house is the seventh house, and all oppositional signs on the wheel of the zodiac have a common shared quest or something that they're trying to figure out, and they start at opposite ends of the spectrum, and the goal is to kind of borrow from one another so they can create a balanced, equilibrated way of solving that area of life. So the first house and the seventh house are Aries and Libra naturally. This axis is about a balance between the relationship to self and the relationship to others. So the character of Aries, when it's in a healthy place, right, is able to incorporate those aspects of Libra qualities, right, which can, are very other-oriented, partnership-oriented, very much based on aesthetic, how something looks, not just what it is. It's that divine feminine energy. It's the receptivity. It's being able to kind of be, hold space and pause in harmonious balance. Pardon my itchy face. So when it's in its its light energy, Aries can incorporate some of those traits, or at the very least appreciate those traits, right? And be able to work with others and make space for others to express that, understanding that it's the diametric opposition of what might be their natural energy or inclination. That's kind of what's going on when it's in an unhealthy context. Both in their shadow can have a tendency to kind of go too far to the other ends of the spectrum. So what that looks like for Aries is, again, there can be, there's being self-focused can be really, really healthy, but it can lend toward being selfish when it's in a shadow context. A lot of the time, Aries can feel alone. Aries can feel like they couldn't be a part of a team even if they wanted to. There's a sense here where they're also always on the move. They're always on the go. I think one of the heartbreaking things about Aries is they start things with that trailblazer energy, and they can tend to fall out of love with things very quickly. And again, it can be hard where that's part of their soul purpose and part of their calling, but it also needs to be held in healthy balance and measure, right? So part of what they're here to do is get things going, get things moving, right? There's a great burst of energy. There's a push, but then it can be followed up by just this, loss of motivation, this loss of energy, especially if somebody's got challengingly aspected Aries placement. Again, motivation can wax and wane. That's very much an Aries kind of, arc where there's a lot of ups and downs here. Again, there's a loner quality. There can be somebody who, Aries in its shadow, like I said, has a hard time sitting still. They can be very, very prone to impulsive choices. And impulsive choices, before they really take the temperature of the room, or get other people's perspective or input, right? If Libra is its opposite and is very other oriented and very partnership oriented, likes to maintain harmony, in its shadow, Aries does not do those things, right? Aries acts first and thinks later, right? There's an impulsive quality. I think one of the beautiful things about Aries is Aries doesn't really hold grudges all that much. They kind of, they have a tendency to kind of have a big reaction and then let it go just as quickly. Again, they're really characterized by a burst of energy and then it fades out very, very quickly. So that's kind of who this character is. So Neptune moving through this sign is a time where we're really going to be exploring the highs and lows, the arcs of this character, right? So like I said, this is really where the personalized element of where it falls in your chart and just your own experiences and how, that energy interacts with the other parts of your chart is going to lend a lot of extra context. So for example, if you, if as Neptune moves through Aries, if you have a lot of other placements in your chart that would suggest that a big arc of this life journey for you is about establishing consistency and stability, that's probably going to be a big focus of what comes up during this period as Neptune moves through Aries. Excuse me. If you are somebody where you have a lot in your chart about being very like other oriented or struggling with people pleasing, that's something that's gonna be coming up for you. I think it's important to note before I even kind of talk about how this transit can look. It's really important to note that what was I gonna say, you guys? Hang on. Oh, it's really important to note that we recently had the lunar north node in Aries. It went into Pisces earlier this year, it was January of this year, but it had been in Aries with the south node in Libra for a year and a half because the lunar nodal switch happens every 18 months. And so part of what that characterized at a collective level is many of us were pushed to finally release relationship karma and start to move in a more self-empowered direction. And I think this kind of lit the flame for this transit that we're going to see. So if you end up seeing themes coming up that are somewhat similar, don't be surprised, right? This may have kind of primed you for this transit. So some of us, we broke up with people during this period of time where we finally released old relationships. Some of us have kind of released limitations on our independence. That's kind of paving the way for what you're going to be doing during this transit. So some of the ways this can look is that there could be a massive healing to the self and our sacred boundaries, kind of like what I was saying before, where, anger, the foundation of anger is self-respect, and that's something that Aries kind of has got going on, right? Like they understand that, especially in a healthier context. This is where you're going to be going through many cycles, many arcs where you explore that part of like the character of Aries, right? So for those of you who struggle to get angry, you might find that you're dealing with anger more. For those of you where you hold a grudge, you might be encouraged to work through and release that. This can look like fighting for yourself. This can look like standing up for yourself a lot more, prioritizing self. Like again, having the lunar nodal, the lunar nodes where the north node was in Aries kind of primed us for this, but really prioritizing yourself, your own projects, getting started, moving in new directions that resonate with you, not so much ourself, like our reference toward other people. It's really about what works for you. And similarly, there's also a willingness to detach from what doesn't resonate and move forward more quickly. Aries, like I said, is ruled by Mars, and this is all about the action that we take, right? There's prioritizing swift action and, not hesitating, not waiting. Again, there's an impulsive quality, but this can really work for us. Now, if you find that you tend to be somebody who struggles with patience, you struggle with consistency, you struggle with stability, those things are going to be called into question, right? You're going to be exploring those parts of your character, highs and lows, light and shadow. Where do you give your power away on that spectrum? That's a big question, right? That's the question you're going to be exploring when it comes to all of the major themes that we're going to talk about as Neptune moves through Aries. And like I said, because Neptune's retrograde for half of the year, this is going to be kind of, like the tides coming in and out, the ebb and flow. There's going to be a period while it's direct of working with some kind of, idea of what you think is happening, and then you're going to have that question, right? And you're going to be, especially where retrogrades can be a slowing down of energy. This is like and it's in Aries, which is usually pretty fast moving, while Neptune is retrograde as it moves through Aries over the next 12 years. During those periods of time, you might find that energy is very much slowed down when it comes to your perception in that area of life. So for example, if you have Aries in the 10th house, this could be where, you have this idea, you have this vision for like the legacy that you want to create for your career, right? What you want to put your name on. And you might take action toward that. You have a clear vision while Neptune is direct. When it goes retrograde, like holes in that concept, right? Any kind of like loose ends might come up where you're like, oh yeah, okay, I have to deal with that. Especially where Aries can have a tendency to rush through things and not be detail oriented, right? This is why Aries and Virgo are quincunx. They struggle to get along in that way. They're very different. And so like that's just one example. If you have Aries in the 5th house or the 7th house, to an extent in the 8th, but there could be questions about relationships, right? Where, a lot of you could be exploring, do I want to be on my own? Do I want to be in a partnership? Do I want to work things out with this person? Some of you, there will be like a back and forth, especially if you have Aries in like one of those kind of placements, a relationship house, or you have like Venus in Aries, possibly Moon in Aries, but there's a question here of like, do I want to be done with this person, or do we want to work it out? There might be a lot of back and forth where it's like you start a new cycle and then some disillusioning happens, right? Where it's like, oh, this is what it really means to be with this person. This is what it really means to commit to this. This is what it really means to keep going. So there's a lot of that kind of back and forth energy that you're going to be experiencing. And again, wherever you fall on the spectrum of these concepts, beliefs, issues, character traits, there's going to be a lot of highs and lows where you're then seeing it from a new perspective. Whenever in regards to that area of life. So some of you, if you have Aries in the 9th house, this is about travel. This is about being able to go back to school and like what kind of path you want to take. If you have Aries in the 12th house, there's going to be a lot here about dealing with impulsiveness. If you guys want to like a breakdown of what this might look like house by house, let me know. I'll make a separate video. But this might look a lot like dealing with impulsiveness, especially around like addictions. That's a big thing that comes up because Neptune very much deals with deals with addictions as well. So some of us will be asked at a deeper level to really confront where a lack of self-control or discipline gets us into trouble, where that encourages us to give our power away. I'll speak more on that a little bit later. Another thing is that we're going to be, during this period of time, exploring our relationship with conflict, sex, anger, and motivation, because all of those are very much Aries traits. And those are Mars energy things, right? So, a lot of us are going to be exploring what we think about those things. And again, breaking down illusions, breaking addictive patterns and cycles, and learning how to make more empowered choices. And that's going to look different for everyone just based on where you are, right? So for some of us, because again, Neptune is that Piscean energy, it's very dogmatic at times, it's very spiritual. Some of us will be looking at, our spiritual beliefs and how do those impact, impact the choices that we make, right? Some of us will be looking at, like maybe other choices we make in relationships and intimacy that will come up. A lot of us will also be like exploring, like I said, our relationship with conflict, with defensiveness. That's another thing that can come through. With anger, some of us will be finding our sacred anger. Some of us will be working through anger cycles in a particular area of life. Some of us will be getting in touch with that because, again, we're getting in touch with ourselves at a deeper level, a more respectful level, a more loving level. And some of us will have to learn to take a softer approach with our self-respect, right? Again, it will look different for you based on your personal chart. And there's going to be a push with motivation as well, because it is that like, let's get up, let's get moving kind of energy. There's going to be, for many of us, there's going to be an explosion of creativity, an explosion of, being pushed to pursue new creative ventures and projects, a lot of motivation for what we want to create. And it's very spiritual, but because it's going through Aries, these can be short-lived or short bursts. So some of us will want to go in a new direction and we'll start and be like, I don't really feel like continuing that. And maybe, you know, during a retrograde period, we go back to it, right? Where like, if you find that you're somebody who's like, you like to stay the course to the point where you don't derivate and try new things, many of you are going to be pushed to drop things that just don't really resonate with you anymore. If you tend to be somebody who's always jumping around from thing to thing to thing, that's going to be questioned. That's going to be called into question for you, right? And for a lot of you, if that resonates, it's like, it will be called into question through the direct periods and the retrograde periods as you keep going back to something where it's like, okay, like, I'm almost getting this energy as I'm talking about this. Like, some of you have something in your life where like it gets hard, it gets difficult, you get pissed, you walk away. And then, you know, maybe during a retrograde, you're looking at something differently. You're like, you know what, I could try it this way instead. Or, you know what, they were right about this. Maybe that will change the result. So there's this sense here where there is, you know, there is a re-examining of something, or you're having to go back to the drawing board and explore those parts of yourself that might struggle to commit or might struggle to make change, right? By contrast. So don't be surprised if those things come up. Some of you are going to have, you're going to have a sense of responsibilities that can come up that help you deal with blind spots when it comes to your relationship with motivation. I do want to say this just because I want to say this thing, but I want to preface it with the caveat. I am not a licensed mental or physical health professional, so nothing we talked about substitution for professional diagnosis, treatment, or advice. Okay. Now that I got that out of the way, I oftentimes view Aries as like your quintessential like ADHD poster child. And whether or not, you know, you have ADHD or you struggle with those types of, you know, those types of symptoms or issues in your life, this could be a time where there is, because it's exploring the relationship with motivation and consistency, this could be a time where you're really encouraged to get a handle on that once and for all, or like get a really good grip on it, right? Really understand, where are your blind spots? You know, where do you tend to fall off? What motivates you? What gets you going? So some of you will be exploring that. There might be a spark in like ADHD diagnoses, but also just because we live in an overstimulated world constantly, a lot of us are going to be called to the carpet, so to speak, to get a really solid handle on where those habits, those tendencies, especially things that we're like low-key kind of addicted to, can kind of like be incendiary, right? So if we struggle with motivation and task initiation, right? You know, this might be a time where you're really exploring the coping mechanisms you have, the escapist tendencies you have that keep you from, like, that make it worse, essentially, that add extra pressure. This is also why, like I said, the relationship with addiction, particularly impulse-based decisions that are addictive and self-soothing, is definitely going to come up for a lot of people, because Neptune can deal with those addictions and that escapist quality. Something that I think is really going to be beautiful, though, is that because Neptune is kind of like almost, it's not directly a feminine energy, but it's almost feminine in its expression a lot of the times. There is something where there can be a beautiful balance of that, you know, divine feminine, divine masculine energy, where there can be, like I said, a burst of creative expression, an explosion in creative expression. And it is very divine. It is very beautiful. I think it's interesting that this is kicking off at the same time that we have Jupiter in Gemini. So there's already this like influx in, you know, new ideas and new ways to communicate. There's already this like very like, you know, hummingbird, busy bee energy that's kind of like kicking this off. So for a lot of you, if you're feeling very high strung, that might be why. But this is going to be something where we are called to, you know, we're really called to kind of like try new things, to create, to be much more bold. Oh, there's a little robin. That's really sweet. To be much more bold with our vision. There's also, this is definitely a time where like confidence is going to come into play. And I feel like the difference, Aries confidence is like, for example, Leo's got that kind of confidence of like, yeah, I know I've got the vibes. I know I'm charismatic. Capricorn's got a confidence that comes with like, I know I can perform. I know I'm going to like, I can do this. I feel like Aries confidence just comes from the fact that they don't think about what will happen if they fail. They just do it. It's charming, albeit annoying sometimes. They just kind of tend to go for it. So a lot of us are going to have that like, leap first, look later, belief be called into question, right? So if we do that all the time, we're going to be called to see how that might actually be like negatively impacting our lives. If we never take a leap, we're going to be called to see how that's negatively impacting our lives, right? Again, it's a relationship with power and where we might have a tendency to hand that off, like to hand over our power, or we have a tendency to, it's like be the sole power in our own lives. Like, so for some, there's like a sense here where your sovereignty as the ability to like be the sole proprietor of power in your own life might come into question, right? The sad thing about Aries is that they often kind of like burn out because they kind of are trying to do everything by themselves, right? And the sad thing as well is like Aries has a hard time relating to other people and being able to kind of like to balance things. I have a whole like thought process on this, but to be able to like hold things in balance, and they have a hard time being able to work with others. And that means a lot of the times their projects burn out and flame out because they don't appropriately delegate. They don't have people around them, and they don't have proper self-awareness and techniques to compensate when they kind of like are losing their steam on something. And so it's like a sad thing. That's why like one of the heartbreaking things about Aries as a character is they can really, really struggle to create consistency. They can really struggle to have anything sustained, right? This is why Aries and Capricorn are very square from one another. They can have a lot in common, but they can also like they really kind of like struggle to understand each other in that way. And so a lot of us are going to be called to really look at that, right? To look at how do we hold on to our own sense of power and independence with a death grip to the point where it's robbing us of the things we want, right? So if you tend to be like overly, invested in the lone wolf thing, that's going to be called into question, particularly if you have Aries in like a partnership house. So 5th house to a certain extent, but really 7th house, I'd say 10th house, 11th house, stuff like that. That's going to absolutely be called into question here. To a certain extent, 4th house as well. But those are themes that we can expect to come up. And, because it's ruled by Mars, and again, in more modern astrology, there's a debate as to whether Venus or Mars tends to kind of rule over sex, and it's like the different types of sex, or the different like intentions. So because, Mars is about, fighting and dominance, and, kind of being action oriented, right? Like it's very like, it can be, a little insistent. There's a sense here where exploring a relationship to like sex and sexuality. Ooh, sorry, I didn't mean to bump that. Sex and sexuality with like urgency, or like using sex for power, right? And so those themes are going to be explored, whether, wherever you fall on that spectrum are going to be explored here. And then let me see what else we have. So we also have a healing to the divine masculine energy, and that's the big thing that's coming up, right? So if you're somebody who you struggle to be in your feminine energy at all, this is going to be called into question and really highlighted for you. If you struggle to take action, you struggle to, move forward on things, to be able to kind of like, really take a leap of faith and just go for it, that's going to be called into question, right? Wherever you kind of fall on the, that spectrum, you're going to be called to really explore at a deep level, either by similarity or by contrast, excuse my burp, where you naturally fall, where your natural comfort zone is, and where you give your power away, right? Because we need a balance. We need both. And so some, this is like, if you're a workaholic and you never ever take a break, that's going to come into question. That's going to come into play. There's a sense where this isn't what I was talking about, but something that just popped into my head. For some of us too, because like Aries is that Mars energy, and there can be that natural warrior quality and like almost defensiveness. And like defensiveness, like it's like a chicken and egg thing with Aries, right? We never know if like Aries is like that, and that's why they can struggle to bond with people sometimes, or if they struggle to bond with people and then develop that defensiveness as like a coping mechanisms, coping technique. But there is a healing to the divine masculine energy of being able to like heal that defensiveness, so you can stand up for yourself, you can create healthy boundaries, but you're not using them to push other people away, right? Having healthy interdependence, not hyper independence, because Aries can absolutely be hyper independent. I also feel like, this will be a healing to the divine masculine energy where it's going to prompt a lot of us to learn how to slow down, if that's what we struggle with. I also, something that I kind of get sometimes with Aries is that sometimes Aries will deal with things by like trying to power through it. And one of the things that I think like what Aries especially wants at like a deep emotional and soul level is to be able to find peace, right? To be able to kind of put the sword down, so to speak, to not have to fight for everything. And so those of us who struggle with those themes as well are going to really be looking at, if I'm holding on to this way of doing things, or I'm always, I'm ready for a fight. I'm prone to yeah, I'll defend myself. There's Aries is definitely like the laugh at your own pain type personality. And so if we have those things, there's going to be like this healing where we are able to have greater self empathy and able to let other people help us, as well as able to let ourselves help other people without that defensive quality as much. Especially like I said, if you have Aries in a house that, or you have Aries placements that are all about emotional connection with others, or being able to work with being able to work with others in an interpersonal context. So again, that healing to the divine masculine energy where we know how to be giving, how to take action toward our dreams and goals, how to be independent, right? And make independent, empowered choices, but not not be out of balance with it, not let that energy overpopulate and overproliferate to the point where it runs our lives, right? It's the only way that we know how to do things. And similarly, if you tend to be somebody who really struggles with these qualities, you struggle with motivation, you struggle to initiate, you struggle to take action, especially to really like trust what you're doing. Or at least like trust your ability to deal with it if it doesn't go the way you want. There's like a resiliency quality that Aries is absolutely known for. There's a sense here of being able to heal that relationship to your divine masculine energy within, and being able to to find that, right? To find your power, right? That being focused on the self doesn't mean you don't care about others. That being self-directed doesn't mean that you can't work with another person. Being on your own doesn't mean that you don't have anyone in your life, right? So being able to balance that. So if you're very other-oriented, and you struggle with people pleasing, or you have a hard time being out of a relationship, or like you fear being alone very, very heavily, you're going to have to confront those fears during this period of time. So again, with the, when Neptune's direct and then when it goes retrograde, this is going to be a time to really gain a lot of wisdom, insight, and awareness into your personal illusions, how those play out in your life, and how those rob you of stability in one form or another, as well as keep you from connecting with others and connecting with the divine in like a very beautiful way. Something else I'm getting to is if you have you've had to embody that divine masculine energy, but it's like been out of necessity, especially for like self-protection, or you've had a lot of like hyper independent energy because people haven't shown up for you, there's going to be a healing quality that takes place, especially corresponding to the area of life having to do with the house where Aries falls in your chart. So if let's say if you have Aries in the 11th house, this could be where you really sometimes struggle to make friends or maintain friendships, and you feel like you're having to look out for yourself, or you're on your own a lot. This can reflect where there's a healing with that energy. Sometimes, I don't always get this, but sometimes too, whenever we are dealing with the divine masculine energy, when it is not in a healthy place, it can be this sense of like bitterness over this perception of over giving. And with Aries, that definitely can happen because Aries can have a tendency to give. Again, there's a burst of energy and then burn out, and then they feel like they have nothing to show for it, and they're kind of like, yeah, deuces, I'm not doing this. And so if you have patterns like that in your life, this Neptune transit through Aries is going to be a time to really be exploring that. So those are kind of broad strokes overviews. I will say, and I should have said this in the beginning, I do a tarot special of the month. And so for all of April, so April 1st through the 30th, yeah, there's like 30 days in April, right? I have a lunar calendar, so that's what I was looking at. That will be the question for the tarot special of the month, is going to be what's going to come up for you during this Neptune transit. It does not cover everything, but it will be like an overarching kind of like big themes you can expect to really be dealing with. And again, I would very, very heavily recommend that you look in your own chart and you self-reference. And like I said, if you are looking for somebody to sit down and do that deep dive with you, I do offer those sessions. So both the tarot special and those sessions are going to be linked down below. So yeah, I would definitely take the time to kind of like look at that. These are the kind of like said broad strokes overviews. something else, one last thing I did want to mention, and I saved it for last because I do want to make a separate video about this, just juxtaposed with Saturn's movement through Pisces, because Saturn will also be moving into Aries next year, 2026. And I'm going to make a separate video about it because there's a lot going on, especially because we now have Pluto in Aquarius. But whatever we're dealing with at an individual level, we can also expect these things at a collective level. Mars is the warrior, especially Aries. That's the warrior, right? Whereas like Mars in traditional astrology co-rules Aries and Scorpio. Scorpio is kind of more the finisher, the destroyer. Aries is really the one, that's the tank. You want to put them out in front. And so at a collective level, we are going to be forced to look at what we fight for and where we fight for power and how we fight for power. So again, I will make a separate video about that because I do think it's very important, and there's a lot of things going into it. But that is something that I think that we can expect to be kind of working through. And I think it's always beneficial to look at, other major transits that are going to be happening on a like semi-frequent basis, but maybe not like as frequently as, Venus's movements or, Jupiter's movements, which, there's the Jupiter transit every year, and like, or transits into a new sign roughly. It's every 12 to 13 months. So like, especially I like to reference Neptune with Saturn and Pluto in particular. So if you guys want to see a separate video about how those are going to kind of like interplay, so how like, Saturn's transits over the next 12 years kind of play out with like Neptune's, you let me know and I'll make a separate video because I have a lot of thoughts. So I'm trying to be concise here. This is me being concise, which is crazy. I am long-winded at times, a lot actually. So yeah, these are just, like I said, broad strokes overviews, things to consider. But yeah, this is what I wanted to mention. I really want to thank you for sharing your time and energy with me today. I hope this has been helpful. I'm looking forward to bringing you more astrological content about your year ahead. And I'm going to go outside and look at those cute birds that are getting my attention right now. You guys, that robin's like literally staring right at me. It knows I was saying something nice about it. Spring is here. Spring is here. New beginnings. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And I hope you have a beautiful, blessed day. Take care.